In the last lecture, we introduced the components of the kidney. And as we learned, the basic functional unit of the kidney is the nephron. It is in the nephron that the filtration and the formation of urine is actually going to take place. So the filtration of the blood and the ultimate formation of the urine is going to take place. We're going to start with taking a look at the basic processes that happened in the nephron. We started off with the process of filtration happening in the renal corpuscle. We're going to take a look at the process of reabsorption and the process of secretion, by which we're able to adjust the final composition of the urine, and then ultimately to the removal of the urine from the kidney and from the body. So we start off in the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle is the structure that is the combination of the blood capillary, known as the glomerulus, and the surrounding entry into the nephron, which is known as the Bowman's capsule. So here we can see the glomerulus. We can see the blood vessel leading into the glomerulus, which is in this case the afferent arteriole. We can see the podocytes that are the visceral layer of the Bowman's capsule, kind of draped over the glomerulus. In this way, they are controlling the ability of materials to move out of the glomerulus, out of the blood capillary, and into the beginning of the nephron, which is the Bowman's capsule. And this process is called filtration. And we discussed the various different components that are going to affect the ability of materials to move out of the blood capillary and into the Bowman's capsule. The combination of structures that is known as the juxtaglomerular apparatus is going to have a role in affecting the glomerular filtration rate by either promoting it, enhancing it, or limiting the filtration. And those components are going to involve the stretch detectors that surround the afferent arteriole, that are known as the juxtaglomerular cells, also known as the granular cells, and the macula densa cells, which form a portion of the distal convoluted tubule that finds itself convoluted and in close proximity to the afferent arteriole. Hence the name juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is the structures that are near the glomerulus. So the granular cells of the juxtaglomerular apparatus are going to be referred to as granular cells also. These are smooth muscle cells that are mechanoreceptors and are going to be sensitive to the amount of stretch, which is affected by the blood pressure. In other words, what is going to trigger these cells? These cells are going to be triggered if they detect that the blood pressure is too low. If the blood pressure is too low, that is not going to help move material from the capillary into the nephron. You need a certain amount of pressure to make that happen. So in order to facilitate that, the cells will release an enzyme that we're going to call renin, which is going to be important in making the pressure greater again so that filtration can happen. In the distal convoluted tubule, the cells known as the macula densa cells are chemoreceptors, and they are going to be sensitive to the sodium content of the filtrate. So this is another view, and we can see here the afferent arteriole. You can see here those granular cells, juxtaglomerular cells. You can see here the macula densa cells that are part of the distal convoluted tubule, and you can see here the glomerulus. You can also see another population of cells that we refer to as the mesanglial cells, and the mesanglial cells are also going to play a role in helping the glomerular filtration process. So, when the blood pressure is high, then we don't need the help of the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So renin release is not going to happen. But when the blood pressure is low, renin release is going to be increased. And what renin is going to do is it is an enzyme that is going to chop off a piece of this protein called angiotensinogen and turn it into angiotensin 1. Now, angiotensin 1 is not a very potent molecule, but when this molecule travels through the lungs, it will come in contact with an enzyme that's called angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, and this will now convert angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a very potent hormone. It will act on the adrenal cortex to promote the secretion of aldosterone. And aldosterone is going to result in saving sodium, it's going to result in saving water, it's going to result in increasing blood volume and cardiac output, and ultimately blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 will also promote vasoconstriction, which will also increase blood pressure. It will also stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, also increase blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 will promote the release of antidiuretic hormone, which will conserve water and increase blood volume and increase blood pressure. It will also promote thirst and drinking, so the overall effect is an increase in blood volume, which results in an increase in blood pressure. The macula densa cells that are located in the distal convoluted tubule are going to be sensitive to the levels of sodium ions. So if there is a low blood volume, low filtration pressure, then there's less sodium, and once again, this is going to stimulate the release of renin, which will ultimately increase blood volume and ultimately result in an increased blood pressure and an increased filtration. This will also result in vasodilation of the afferent arteriole so that we have more fluid flowing into the glomerulus, and therefore more pressure in the glomerulus, more filtration in the glomerulus. So we have what we refer to as the tubuloglomerular feedback. If the glomerular filtration pressure is too high, or the sodium content of the filtrate is too high, then the macula densa cells need to prevent that, so they will release an inhibitory component, ATP in this case, which is a vasoconstrictor and constricts the afferent arteriole. So that lowers the amount of fluid that is coming into the glomerulus. And if you lower the fluid, you're going to lower the filtration, and so that will decrease the glomerular filtration pressure and the rate of filtration. So my imaginary hose that has connection to a faucet with holes in the sprinkler, I could step on the hose at point A, afferent, or I can step at the hose at point E. If I want to shut it down, if I want to turn down the amount of water that's coming out of my hose, then where should I apply pressure? At A or E? Right? So if I put pressure on A, then what's going to happen? It's going to shut down the amount of water that's coming out of my sprinkler. So let's start over here. We have a drop in blood pressure. Renin is released, acting on the angiotensinogen, the substrate produced by the liver, cleaving that to make angiotensin 1, which when it passes through the liver, or through the lungs rather, and gets acted on by ACE, will become angiotensin 2, which will promote the release of ADH, which will promote the release of aldosterone, which will cause vasoconstriction, all of these resulting in an elevated blood pressure. So this is just another visualization of what we just talked about. So this was the process that occurred in the renal corpuscle and the juxtaglomerular apparatus comprised of the afferent arteriole sensors, the granular cells, and the distal convoluted cells known as the macula densa. So there is a tremendous amount of fluid, 180 liters, that passes into the kidney, passes through the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule, but only about 1 or so liters is going to ultimately be used to make urine, with a certain amount that we have to have because our urine, our waste products are in solution. So we have a certain amount that we have to use up. But more than 90% is going to be reabsorbed. And that primary place for reabsorption is going to happen in the proximal convoluted tubule. So the filter rate is now entering the proximal convoluted tubule, and when we say it's reabsorbed, we have to say where it's going, and where it's going is into the peritubular capillaries. So here you can see the cross-section of the proximal convoluted tubule. You can see in this image over here abundant microvilli and abundant mitochondria, which is going to clue us in what's going to be going on here. The microvilli tell us we're going to be doing a lot of absorption. The mitochondria tell us that we're going to have a requirement